Please note, for further studies on life seals and aura charts including understanding the Book of Revelation, read Edgar Cayce on Soul Symbolism by Kevin J. Tadashi. Edgar Cayce. Symbols and the Self. By Violet Shelley. Part 4. Life Seals as Reminders. Symbols and the Self. Contents. Symbols, signposts to insight. Symbols as key. Aura charts as records. Life seals as reminders. The symbol-minded self. Edgar Cayce's life seals. The left seal was painted by Miss 2486, and the right side was painted by Margaret Zentgroff. The storehouse of symbology in the Edgar Cayce readings includes approximately 135 life seals. These differed from the aura charts in that they were composed of very few symbols, and instead of calling to mind a series of incarnations, concentrated on a quality for which the individual should strive or a problem rooted in the past. The readings often refer to them as patterns, and use them to demonstrate that hidden within each of us is the knowledge of why we are here, this time or any time. The seals were designed to remind the subconscious mind of past experiences and of particular lessons. Although the extracts in this chapter illustrate the use of symbols of all kinds, the emphasis is most often on personal symbols. Most of the seals were requested, but some were voluntarily given at the outset of a reading. In analyzing the sojourns in the earth, as well as the interims and consciousnesses in other realms or planetary sojourns, these would be given as a pattern or a symbol for the entity. The reasons for the life seals were also explained. As has been given through these channels, oft individuals are given life seals. These vary quite a bit from even the figures in an aura chart, and at times they conform. The aura chart is made for that as a study by the individual of those things wherein it failed or developed, and are to be as lessons, and that is why it has been given. This may become a helpful influence to the individual, while a plaque, or life seal, is usually as the reminder of some individual fact or act to be attained or discarded, and it is indicated in the information given respecting such. The aura chart, to those who would study same, for little comes of itself, is for the individual until it has fully attained. Who has attained? Then study same oft, analyzing them as to the significance, as to that given as the warning. For as he gave, he that would be forewarned would not allow his house to be broken up. Whose house? What house? Thy body, thy mind, thy soul. How the seals were to be used. People who received life seals were told to have them painted and to keep them where they could be seen often, implying that the visual reminder would have more impact on the subconscious than would words. They were meant to be inspirational, not focal points for meditation. They were to be used as keys for the opening of the individual's awareness. Please give me the origin of the seal referred to in my life reading, an interpretation of its figures, its relationship to my activities both past and present. Instructions for arranging the figures to form the symbol mentioned. How the symbolism can be constructively used so that its meaning can be recognized and applied, and tell me if it should be used as a motive for meditation. If the life reading is interpreted, it will be seen the activities and the experience are represented in the seal by the symbols. The interpretation is that these symbols should enable the entity to visualize the proper interpretation of problems in the lives of others. The life seal is not as a motive for meditation, but the symbols are signs, just as given in the beginning, that the sun, the moon, the stars are given as signs, as symbols, and these should allow, in periods of meditation, the questions and answers to others, as well as enabling self to be made aware of, or given, we might say, the cue, or the key, or a prompting. not to be used as a reason for meditation, rather as the answer in meditation. What are the intents and purposes for which I came into this present experience, as referred to in my life reading? Just as indicated, to complete the purposes in using each ability to the glory of the first cause, or God, never as that of gratifying, satisfying of self alone, but as an enlightening influence, as a helpfulness, as an inspiration, as a guiding force to many. The question that prompted this discussion of the use of life seals was posed by a teacher of astrology. The seal in question was given in 28801. In interpreting the records, these are unusual, in that there is a seal, or the activities of the entity are indicated in a symbol with the record here, a moon, a star, the cross, the shepherd and the staff, but with a circle of light. These might be arranged in a symbol to mean much to the entity. The reading reminded her of the possible attainments, which were actually given first in the symbols of the seal. The moon and the star, paradise. The cross, the way of rising above the material. The shepherd and the staff, the way of the Christ. The circle of light, indicating that the white light of understanding would surround the attainment. The universal symbolism of numbers is seen in the life seal given in 5852. The three-cornered leaves of the cinnamon bush carry the message of the triune God and of the threefold aspect of man, as body, mind, and spirit. The ideal shown is the budding and then the blossoming of the Christ consciousness. The pyramid is a reminder of a life in Egypt, when the law of one was taught. The star with the crescent is the ancient symbol of paradise. What is my seal? Among the seals here we find evening in the distance, the pyramid far away, with the star and crescent rising. We find in the forefront the cinnamon bush, both with its three-pointed leaves and its blossoms and buds. This is the symbol of the life for the entity. 4. The interpretation is likened unto the symbol, the supplying of life and substance in the foreground to the pyramid in the lessons learned. The star and the crescent, the Son of Man and his light among men. Seals for children. In July of 1937, a lady requested a life reading for her 9-year-old granddaughter. The first part of this reading 14011 explained that the earthly sojourns act as urges to the emotions, while the mental or innate urges come from the experiences of the soul and the environs about the earth. Neither is an impelling force, the determining factor is the will, and what it does about that which is set as its ideal. It was noted that she had an innate tendency to love that which is easy, beautiful, harmonious. She might become a singer, musician, or actress, at any rate, an individual of some renown. However, there was also the tendency to be dilatory when it came to hard work or exercising patience. In order to learn much-needed lessons, she should be a homemaker rather than have a career. She should study home economics, and all things pertaining to the creation of beauty and harmony in the home. Orderliness was stressed. This was the seal suggested. First, not the circle but rather the outside as that of the shield, as he called the shield, see? In the central portion would be the cross, not erect but as when taken down. Above in the center would be the dove, or the bird of peace. Upon either side there would be a rose, one a pink, the other salmon color. Underneath these would be rather the steps or the stairway, that would be in those colors, also. The fringe about same on the outer edge would be as the vine entwined. The interpretation. That the cross is the way, but should be leading and not standing still. The rose represents patience as well as faith. The steps represent the building up to the home, the cross, the way of peace and life and understanding. The entwining vine about the shield represents faith in the preservation for truth, hope, life, as entwined about the self. The life seal given voluntarily in 36211 was for an 8-year-old girl. The emblems in it represent the choices the entity was to make in this life. The reading mentioned an incarnation in America at the time of the Civil War, stating that the child often dreamed of the colonial home with large columns which was destroyed in that period. It traced to that life fear of uniforms and firearms. The other lives mentioned were one in Palestine at the time of Jesus and one at the time of Moses. Dance was recommended as a mode of expression in this life, because both the incarnation in the time of Moses and a previous life in Egypt had prepared the entity for it. When the mother asked why the child walked and talked in her sleep so much, the answer was, close to the music that spans the distance between the finite and the infinite. Here would be given an emblem of the pattern of life for this entity, and this of an unusual nature or design. In the center of at least a 14-inch circle, put in color what has been called the black-eyed Susan, in full bloom, not too stiff, not too erect, but with some of the foliage was same. On one of the blossoms put a honeybee. About to light put another bee, but this a bumblebee, not a honeybee. These are as emblems significant of the choices the entity is to make in this life experience. In the upper left-hand corner, as of the experience of the entity in the earth's plane, put the court of the Queen of Assyria, and the entity as the dancing girl with the tiger as a companion. This should have many figures and same, but no indication of man about the scene. This would not be too large, to unbalance same. On the right hand at top put the view of Peter fleeing from the cross, with the silhouette in the background of the 3 crosses, with the heavy lightning in and from a darkened sky. In the left lower portion put the caravan, with at least 3 camels, though 2 in the distance. In the front would be the figure of the girl in same, the face half veiled but mounted on the camel, led by a robed individual. This should be in color, as should all of these figures. Put in the lower right hand the figure of the golden calf that was set up while the lawgiver was in the mount, and the figures dancing about same. The priest in the background but the dancer more in the foreground. These, as we find, are the symbols of the individual experience through the earth. In analyzing the urges latent and manifested, we would magnify the virtues and minimize the faults. This, too, should be that lesson of greater importance in the developing mind of this entity. Else the entity, as may be indicated from the character of the experiences, may become self-centered, and this would be to the detriment of the greater development of the entity. Magnify the virtues of all, as you would have thy God, thy Maker, magnify thy trying, thy attempts to be holy, not righteous. So few can ever attain that, none in the material world, but they can try. All can be holy, that is, dedicating body, mind, and purpose. That is being holy. Then, the try may be counted to thee as righteousness. For righteousness is of God. As to the latent urges, we find music, harmony, using of rhythm as a part of the experience of the entity. And it should be through such channels that the entity may make the greater material success in this material plane. If there is set the purpose and aims of the entity, then the entity also through same may make the greater mental and spiritual development. But if there is the fleeing from hope, as indicated, if there is the lack of creative activity, or the allowing of the disturbance as indicated in the bumblebee, the entity may be prevented from gathering, as it were, honey from the holiness in purpose. These, then, are as the warnings to those who would direct and encourage the entity. Not by might or main but by love, by patience, by putting the first things first in the activities of this unfolding entity in the present. For remember, as given, train the child in the way it should go, and when it is old it will not depart from it. But training for this entity, as for most entities, is better by example than by precept, or by you do this, and you do that. These are poor examples for one already inclined to see material things first, and yet in the very rhythm and harmony of the soul there are the opportunities and possibilities of the entity. Astrologically, we find Mars, Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter, and note their importance. Anger from Mars may upset the body and cause a great deal of disturbance, to others as well as to self. Be angry but sin not. You will learn it only in patience and in self-possession. Also there is activity and beauty as may be attained by the entity in body and in mind. In Mercury the judgment, which will ever depend upon or between love and duty. And these may become good or bad, dependent upon that set as the ideal of the entity. Learn that virtue, honor, and glory are things that have their own reward within them, for good of the body, good of the mind, and the respect the soul has of both. We find in Venus the grace, the activities, love that may be material, mental, or spiritual. For these are within the realm of the entity's experience. In Jupiter we find but the reflections of self, in the application of the other three urges. Seals as keys to vocation. Another life seal was given voluntarily in November 1943, for a 46-year-old housewife. The reading spoke of urges from Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn, and thus high mental abilities, universal consciousness, love of home and beauty, and finally changes. This woman was enjoined to make hers a teaching life, spent in helping and contributing to the welfare of the unfortunate. The seal given to hold her purposes visually before her was: in the beginning, we would give what might be said to be the seal of life for this entity. For this entity is among those that chose definite activities in the Egyptian experience, when there were those activities there for re-establishing the relationship of creative forces, or God, to the relationships of man. The entity was among those in the temple beautiful, aiding those that were dedicating their lives to the activity chosen, not only in vocation but in activities through the body and mind. Hence the seal would come very close to that indicated for the entity in that experience. In the center of a plaque or card, about 14 inches square, make a circle about 12 to 13 inches. This would be made in many circles, down to a point in the center. Then across each side of this connect with a vine that would blossom upon either side, right and left, at the top. Upon this sign or vine put the honeybee. One on either side, one on wing as toward the center, indicating the varied cycles through which individuals passed, as well as how each activity in an experience, as each life in its activity, is associated or connected one with the other. The bee represents the worker, either of body, mind, or soul of the individual entity. They each have their attributes and their experience in same, yet one, even as the manifestations in the material experience Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This should mean much to the entity, as it analyzes same in that which will be given for its activities, its abilities in the earth. We would minimize the faults, we would magnify the virtues. This should be the policy, the purpose of the entity in its dealings with its fellow man. For as has been indicated in that the body would emulate in the earth, Father, forgive as I forgive. Thus as the entity applies this in the experience, and in its dealings with the fellow man, there is the application of that he so oft gave, as ye do it to the least of my little ones, ye do it unto me. These should be, then, the tendons, the sinew of the spirit through and in which the entity would apply itself in its efforts to bring help to others, not by might or strength, but through the spirit of truth as may be manifested in a word, in a movement, in a smile. As to the urges latent and manifested for this entity, these are not according to the ordinary astrological terms. For as the entity finds itself in this particular realm a part of this universe and the universal consciousness, there are those consciousnesses also in Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn and Uranus, Neptune, yes, even in the spheres through which the Sun and the Moon are active. For these were given to the souls of men for their use, not men given to the world for its use. For the injunction is to multiply and to conquer and to subdue and to be aware, not as for selfish motives but the glory of the creative forces, God. So with that same spirit and purpose in which all nature, yet all the universe, declares the glory of God. Can ye as an entity dare to do less? Reading 53731 for a woman, then 48 years old, explained that men found her lovely and wanted to tell her their troubles. It added, better let them alone though. It did recommend that she at some time write about that which has prompted thee to assume or to take stands as you have in relationships to others, not only the opposite sex, but thy own sex. For the entities' approach to each are quite different. In the question period it was indicated that she should be a teacher and would be good at research of any kind. These occupations would be most beneficial materially. However, the reading reiterated that she should write. The reading stressed the fact that her abilities were limited only by the standard, the ideal that she herself set. In analyzing the urges which are latent and manifested for this body, as we find, an emblem might prove very helpful and very significant for this body. As a constant reminder to the entity not to allow itself to become a sponge absorbing all the worries and troubles of others. For very easily the entity becomes a confidant, and while it is well to be able to counsel with and help others, yet this may be carried so far as to make the tendencies for morbidity, if it may be put in such a word, or morbidness for the body in listening to all the sorrows of others, of its friends, or even those with whom the entity may come in contact. These, as we find, would be the pattern which may be seen as a part of the experience of the entity through the sojourns which may be indicated in the earth. This we would put on at least a 14-inch square white card. Make a circle at least 13 inches in diameter. Then, we would put in the center of this a crab with a sponge in its claws. This should be in the colors, green, yellow and gray, and then about it put the cross in the upper left-hand corner, and an open book. These figures should be small. In the upper right-hand corner, put the tree of life with all manners of fruits and the leaves, as aspen leaf in shape, this green but the fruit golden. And in the lower left hand or inside the circle, of course, would be the lily, this with 3 flowers on one stalk. This represents 3 graces, or the 3 phases of experience. This would be in color also. These will signify to the entity, first, a reminding of the cross, which should be in gold and square in shape, a reminding of the source which is fully indicated in the open book of knowledge, while that in the lower left indicates the beauty, the grace, the loveliness of the individual itself, its patience, its affections, its beauty, while that in the lower right represents that which may be attained. Not only the tree of abundant supply and with the manner of fruits, but the leaves as healings to the peoples with whom the entity may come in contact. In analyzing, then, the urges which are latent and manifested, we find here is an entity who is beautiful of character, lovely of person, and yet apparently always worrying about something. For it carries too often burdens of others about the entity. Know, then, as indicated in the seal, the sources of supply and put not only thy burdens upon him but point them more often to others that their burdens, too, must be placed with him, who is capable and able to bear them, as he did the burdens, the sorrows, the sins of the whole world, upon his own shoulders. For he first spiritualized life, and then through life lived in the earth by the patience, as attained and gained, spiritualized body and mind. In September 1935, a woman who listed her occupation as an expression teacher was told that her present life was showing the astrological influences she had brought in, as well as the influences of former sojourns in the earth. From the activities through the astrological sojourns of the entity, then, there have been broad influences in the inner self that are innate, and that find expression in those things indicated as being a portion of the entity's experience in the present. The reading traced to Uranus her present interest. In Uranus we find those influences making for interests of the mystical or imaginative nature, having to do with the activities in people's lives, in the associations of others, in the abilities within self for depicting and interpreting for others those things that may be or are of the imaginative nature. The entity is an interpreter of art, song, verse, and of those things that may make for experiences in the affairs of individuals rather than eccentricities. Yet these having an experience in the entity itself, others oft call the entity rather unusual than eccentric. The life reading mentioned an incarnation as an early settler in America. There she learned tolerance and patience, and developed her present ability to make friends. The reading told also of an experience in Palestine and noted that then the entity had gained much in the mental and spiritual aspects, because she had traveled as a singer, spreading the messages and teachings of Jesus. Her current ability to nurse and to help those in trouble stemmed from that period. Her talent for interpretation was traced to a Persian incarnation. All the entity's activities and ministry to the fellow man. For the hope of that as might be builded in the experience of each individual soul for its relationship to the creative forces were attributed to a life in prehistoric Egypt. Having this background, the woman may have found a great deal of aid in her requested life seal, described in the reading as follows. As would be the globe with the markings of the land, and the cross that leads the way. With the light of the dove of peace that was the manner and means of making known to the world his reception as the light of the world through the cross, as thou hast known and seen. Thy colors, then, would naturally be the blues with mode, and the red edging here and there. Blue, mood, red. These are those that make for vibrations and thine activities that make for an understanding or a way through which vibrations may arise. Also the odors which would make for the raising of the vibrations would be lavender and orris root. For these were those of thy choice in the temple of sacrifice. They were also thy choice when thou didst walk with those who carried the spices to the tomb. As to the flowers, these would be the star of the field or the pointed star in the field. These are the emblems that mean much to thee. A former concert singer was given the following life seal. In a preceding reading 17702 she had been told that it had always been her experience to act as an emissary or messenger to others. It was therefore necessary to keep a balance in herself. For her, numerological effects and vibrations were more important than astrological effects. Because of her tremendous sensitivity to vibration, it was recommended that she wear a bloodstone or ruby. It was also suggested that she lecture on numerology. In regard to studying numerology, she was told that most may be gained from the one book, the Bible. The seal given was that which has been a part, or sought to be a part of, that to represent the order and brotherhood of man. 3 links that would be joined, upward and downward, the 3 links set in such a manner, both up and across, as to form a cross. About same would be a wreath entwined with berries, thorns and white blossoms, not as a ribbon, but as a wreath. This would represent not only that which is and has been the experience, but the strength and same to form the greater environs for greater service. Let the seal as indicated be as an emblem, not in the form of something to be worn, but something to be studied each morning or evening when you would analyze thyself and the motives of others. Then, as something of drawn work, or as a painting of sufficient size to indicate the union of the links as the 3 phases of man's experience, as crossed with the 3 phases of the relationships in the spiritual realm, as crowned by that which represents the purity as well as the blood and the fruit thereof. The life reading for a young man stated that while astrological aspects have their innate influence, if this entity's records were taken from the astrological standpoint alone, little would conform to what the entity has done about same in the present. It also revealed that certain former experiences in the earth were wielding a great influence in the present life. It suggested that this man should be involved in any of the fields of service that have to do with transportation, or any connected with pigments or colors. It pointed out that the simpler the life, the greater it may be. In answer to a request for a life seal, the following was given: a ship, as would be, with the wheel and the cross on same, and the bird of paradise a part of the figure in same. A great deal of color, as may be inferred from the very natures of the figures representing the mean, the wheel as the wheel of life, and as the steering, the guiding influence in the messages or the activities that are represented or illustrated by the ship, carrying the very nature of affiliation or associations with others. Also, the bird of paradise represents the peace and harmony that must be kept ever between or in all such associations. Bread, so commonly called the staff of life, was used as an important symbol in the seal of life for an 18-year-old girl. She had applied for help in coming to a decision about going to college or taking a business course. Numerology was mentioned in the life reading. Numbers also will ever bear an influence with the entity, and those combinations that make for the 9 will be well in the experience. The fact that 9 is symbolic of completion is shown in the explanation that she is always inclined to try to finish whatever she begins, no matter what it is. The reading recommended business college. It added that when she was older she should start writing short stories, and that she should be able to publish a book when she was 34 or 36 years old. This seal was to remind her of her purpose and direction. Please give seal and its interpretation. The seal of life. A loaf of bread is the center, before which is set the cherubs, and the background rather a sunset with the mountains. Not as of the sacred mountain of China or Japan, rather that as of Mount Olivet. These are the indications of the interpretations of same, the frugality of the abilities, and yet the supply that is ever as, give us this day our daily bread. This is not, as might be expected, set so that the loaf becomes the most prominent, but as the portion of the whole setting as to supply the food in spirit, in mind, in body.